In this video we're going to be going off continent, off the North American continent, and be taking a look at the capital city of Spain, Madrid, and looking at the population demographics. You can see it's quite a large city here in the modern day, over 3 million people. We like to focus on the turn of the 20th century. We're just over 500,000, as you can see. A lot of that growth happening throughout the latter decades of the 1800s. And if you're new to the channel, I would just like to clarify the position of Old World exploration has to do with investigating the likelihood that our historical narrative has been altered to suit those who have been crowned, if you will, in our society as the movers and the shakers, I suppose, of civilization. And as we look at Madrid, we see the same forces in charge. We're looking at a heavy Vatican influence. We're looking at a heavy monarchical influence as well. And we like to focus on the architecture, and the purpose of these videos is to compile the architecture of a specific region into a single video. But we begin with a depiction of Madrid from 1750, we are told. And a few things jump out at me here. First of all is the magnitude of the architecture itself. We are witnessing all sorts of domes and spires, but we're looking at a very, very wide street, a depiction of a very wide street. And we'll see that throughout here. So some of the questions are, why would you build such a very wide thoroughfare at a time when the mode of transportation was horse and buggy, basically? And we have another depiction going back even further in time to 1562. This would be supposedly when the monarchy moved the capital to Madrid. But even this depiction, this early depiction, they're trying to show the walled fort, which is supposedly how Madrid gets its beginnings. But we're seeing the same architecture even going so far back as the 1500s. And of course a series of churches, numerous churches in Madrid. This is an interesting structure, though, very familiar looking spires here. We've seen these across the North American continent as well. But what we're looking at appears to be some sort of worldwide architectural features, if you will. So the suggestion here on this channel is that as a worldwide population, we were we existed at a much higher state than we have been told, and that the history of humanity has been diminished. And when we look at these types of images, you see the magnitude of the architecture. We also see the rail cars as a mode of transportation, the suggestion being that these were around for much longer, and there was some sort of reset or series of resets that occurred, and the technology was being re-implemented into society for a brief time before they were all eliminated, of course. But we see this feature pop up wherever we look here in this old world research. But if we look at the iconography on many of these structures, we're going to see similar themes as we've seen in places like North America. And I think even for people who have not ventured into this old world subject matter, it is not such a stretch to believe that the monarchies and the major religious organizations have altered history to suit their power structure. The suggestion here on this channel is just that alteration is much more dramatic than we have been told. Here we see here's a street from looking like the early decades of the 20th century. Remnants of the old world. You see many domes again and spires, multi-storied structures, everything made of stone, very reminiscent of what we've seen on the North American continent. And you see more of a modern blocking off, I guess, of whatever alteration is being made in behind these walls. And more familiar depictions of religious structures. And it seems no matter where we look, all the regions of the world have been devastated by war and pestilence. And a lot of this, the suggestion here, a lot of this is being used to reset the populations of these regions, to send everybody back to the starting line, if you will, where once there was a much grander civilization. And here's a nice look at those wide streets that we saw in the drawing. But you have to ask the question, why on earth would you be building such a wide thoroughfare? How many horse and buggies can you get in here, along with the horse-drawn streetcars? Again, part of that worldwide narrative that the implementation of the streetcar was widespread, but it was implemented before the discovery of electricity, so they were built originally to be pulled by horses, which I think is an absurd suggestion, more fitting of the possibility that that this was an older form of transportation that has been that was eventually implemented when electricity was when they found a way to use electricity to make these things move. But initially they were pulled by horses until they could figure out the grid system again and alter the grid system. It doesn't make a lot of sense to have such a wide street. Also, you can see the brick paved streets or cobble paved streets, and much of the light posts or lamp posts looking very familiar as well. Much of what we've seen in on the North American continent as well. So the architecture tends to repeat itself. One thing I did notice in Madrid are these types of buildings. If I zoom in on this one, many of them said to have been built in the 20s, late teens to early 20s, which is strange because you have that whole Spanish flu thing happening in 1918. Madrid, apparently one of the first places in the world to report that the epidemic was happening. But you have a smoothness to some of this architecture, looking like there was almost maybe a refacading going on of older structures. And we're looking at the Archaeological Museum, said to have been built from 1866 to 1892, right in that sweet spot of the reset timeline. Suggestion here on this channel being that this is likely a much older structure. Interesting also the statues we have on the front here. Also note the use of the letter V instead of the letter U, which we have also seen, although there's obviously look like newer letters than the building itself even. They're still using that same style of lettering. A very large structure. This one appeared to be this would be the back end of that structure, and I think it was designated as the library as well if we zoom in. But you can also see a lot of familiar statue work going on here. I've seen this wreath in many places in North America. A lot of that has been removed in a lot of the North American buildings. And just the quality of the architecture itself, very reminiscent of what I would consider to be old world architecture, and that we've just been given a replacement story that diminishes mankind. This would be the main room in this library. You can see the skylight, the use of skylights again in the late 1800s. At a time when really humanity is just getting on its feet with the Second Industrial Revolution. We're looking at all sorts of interesting statue work, massive doorways, wrought iron doorways. Definitely beautiful architecture in Madrid. The Banco de Bilbao. This one really jumps out at me as well, with the 4 horse figures and with chariots on top of the structure. Hard to believe you would be building a bank to look like this in the 1920s after dealing with all of the hardships that came along with it. Interesting also, you have the statues sitting on the railings. Very interesting part of the architecture there. You can see them as well. But there is a bit of maybe a refacading or resurfacing going on here. Suggestion again being that this is much older and ticking all the boxes of the old world architecture. Maybe you're wondering, how is this possible? If you're not familiar with this research, how could history have been altered so dramatically, so that the people over the years lose the memory of our true past? And as I've mentioned many times on this channel, we're dealing with a systematic process where we have a controlling or ruling class dictating the perception of the masses, and a process going on multi-generationally, using catastrophe and war to devastate the population, to disorient the population, and of course an education system that pushes a singular narrative and doesn't tolerate any sort of diversion from that narrative. Another bank, the Spanish bank, if you will. I'm not going to attempt all the Spanish pronunciations. Again, fitting the very familiar timeline that we've seen in North America. This is a beautiful looking structure. And again, you can see these statues perched upon the top. A very strange feature in the architecture. And we have again the horse-drawn streetcars. But just take a look at the infrastructure itself and how it all appears to be part of that. This appears to have been one. Hard to believe that this one was constructed where much of the surroundings would have been already in place, if we're to believe the timeline of the construction of this building. This photograph looking like it's coming from the early 1900s, so this would be, at the time, a relatively new structure. Certainly not looking like it's relatively new. Another Bank of Spain. I don't know if that date has been confused with the previous date. That was very difficult to discern some of the stuff doing the research. But you can see again these statues in the architecture. Absolutely spectacular structure, having very similar features to what we've seen in other locations here on this channel. And if you haven't checked out my work here on this channel, I'd certainly encourage you to go back in the catalog, check out maybe some of the cities you're interested in. I've covered almost 100 North American cities and gone off continent a few times, and the effort here on this channel will be to start cataloging more cities off continent, just to bring you some of the architecture and give you a sense of the timeline. So very old cobbled streets, streetcar with the electrification at this point. None of this looking new. All of this looking like it's been around for quite some time. Certainly looking like we're at the turn of the century here in Spain with this photograph. Cast iron base for the light posts. All ticking boxes of an older civilization, a much more intact civilization, and certainly not what we've been told about the past. And that streetcar, very prominent in those that turn of the century time in Madrid. And again, a nice look at some of the architecture with the domes and what we would consider to be potentially some sort of antiquitech in the higher reaches of these buildings. Completely different energetic system than what we are familiar with, and certainly not something that we have been taught even existed, and I suspect there's a reason for that. Instead, we are told that we were a primitive people up until the turn of the 20th century, when all of these great minds came up with all of these inventions that have, in a very short period of time, despite the fact that we were able to construct so magnificently before these inventions came about. So this is the Hotel Alfonso. I believe coming out of the early 20th century as well. The National Hotel opened in 1925. Part of that flattening, again, as I mentioned, squaring off and flattening, I think that was probably part of the alteration process, but we still see all sorts of iconography going up, and potentially Antiquitect, even at this late period, we're told. And we don't get a lot of construction evidence from the past, and which is also a big head scratcher. We don't see cities under construction. We don't see multiple buildings. If we get a construction photo from an early time period, it's a singular image of a building, and it's usually not very convincing. Several castles in and around the region that would date back further, we are told. This one supposedly have begun in 1475. This one's a strange one, actually. Some of the mixed mediums that you're seeing. They're very strange to see these round ball-like structures, and then you have what you might even consider to be some sort of cement, and then you have a rubble-like rock. So anyone who's delved into the circuit board reset meltology research, this one might be jumping out at you as evidence of some sort of post-cataclysm reset. Not making a lot of sense why on earth you would build this way. My suggestion here is that likely that these are not the original building materials, but they have been altered. This would be the inner court of that. Again, we have a sort of a contradiction in mediums here. You have a very, very fine work going on here, although if this were in another region, you could almost say this was 2,000 years old. So again, I think all the timelines have been obscured. There has been a united front to obscure the past here. And it goes beyond culture and language. Makes me think of the Tower of Babel story, where we have been divided in that way, and we were just getting to the point where we're able to communicate with each other easily again. And what we're finding are these similarities that seem to pop up around the world. This is the I'm butchering it here. No, I don't have it written down. Monteagudo Castle, looking again like we're looking at the after effects of something that was much more well built, and there's some sort of blistering effect that went on here post-cataclysm. That's what I think. And then this was just perched on top. There are depictions of this without the statue on top. And if we zoom in, we can see a very strange, again, mixed medium going on here. Again, a very similar timeline. This cathedral beginning in 1880s, now not really finishing till 93, we're told. Very strange. We've seen a few of those modern cathedrals, I suppose you could say. My guess is that there was alterations going on throughout the 20th century, and we'll see some evidence of that in this series of photographs. Amazing. Looks like a copper door, possibly. And I think when we look at the ceiling area of this, I think this looks modern. This is not something that fits the old world architecture, although, I'm talking about the ceiling here. I think everything else does, right down to the lights themselves, and of course the pipe organ. There you have that very heavy stonework going on, very high quality construction. And another, what I think is evidence of alteration, something that was going on in the 20th century. This is certainly not at the same level as much of what I would consider to be old world architecture. A part of the narrative has to do with presenting a previous structure in that spot. And this is their attempt to show us that this was the previous structure in that location before they began building the new cathedral. And another look at some of that ceiling work. And though it is, I don't want to take away from the artwork, it is just not at that same level of magnificence as we see in many of these other locations, as we'll see moving forward. The Church of St. Manuel and St. Benedict. There's a look at the interior, looking like mosaic to me, a lot of this. Some strange depictions going on here. Again, you have a winged feature. This is supposed to be an angel. I'm not sure. We have the fountains as well. Fountains in this research have been linked with the grounding mechanism, potentially, of an energetic system, cooling and grounding. A lot of people have suggested that the removal of that system had a hand in frying that circuit board as well. And a lot of the fountains have been turned into war memorials and the rest of it. Now the old cinema, Cine de Calad. There we go. You can see the dome structure in behind there. This says the Crystal Palace, said to have been built in 1887, linked with a bit of a World's Fair narrative, as we'll see moving forward. The inspiration for this supposedly coming from the Crystal Palace in London from 1850, 51. All, I think, part of the reset narrative. And some ugly stories coming out of these World's Fairs. And this one no different. As you can see, I've snipped this from an article about the human zoos at the Madrid Exposition in 1892. You can see here, supposedly intended to mark the 400th year of the discovery of America, which is interesting because that's what's happening in Chicago in 1893, marking that same time period. So there's a unification and alignment of the narrative, as you can see, cross borders. And a part of the narrative that comes along with these World's Fairs has to do with the human zoos, where they're depicting people supposedly in their native habitats. Madrid looked after their humans better than any other human zoos in Europe at the time. Relatively low death rate, apparently. Only 4 of the 43 humans died as a result of poor living conditions in the park here during that fair. Very ugly. And here's supposedly a depiction of the Spanish royals and the human zoo. Filipinos, apparently, is what they were. An awful part of the narrative. I just thought I would add a little bit of something similar that came out of the St. Louis World's Fair as well. That's what this depiction is here. Here we have the Atocha railway station. Originally built in 1851, we're told, destroyed by fire, rebuilt in 1892, fitting our familiar timeline. Let's take note of the griffin work we have on the top here. Now, the griffin has been associated with a lot of people who do research into Tartaria. The whole Tartarian aspect of this research has been sort of shunned by some people and embraced by others. A lot of people don't like the limiting factor of the geography. Tartaria, if you look on some of the old maps, in the Russian area, but a lot of people use the term Tartaria to describe what it was an old world civilization. I often use the term old world, but you could say that the two are synonymous depending on your perspective. We do have apparently a construction photo of this station. This is supposed to be from 1885, the reconstruction. Maybe this helps clarify what I was talking about, the construction photos from earlier. I wouldn't put a lot of stock in this photo whatsoever. And here it is in the modern day, a beautiful structure. And again, another look at those griffin type figures. And I think the juxtaposition between the paltry mode of transportation and the very well intact infrastructure is what brings a lot of people to this research and the suggestion that history, as we have been told, is not exactly a linear progression of development and technology, but in fact that we have been devastated, and our perception of the past has been reset. So much of what we see in Europe having to do with this type of architecture is attributed to the Romans. My suggestion is that a lot of that is a false backstory, and that the Romans have been inserted into our historical timeline as an explanation for much of this architecture. And we'll keep moving forward with Madrid. Here we have the Grand Hotel. So there's that timeline I mentioned, the early 20s, in the 1900s. This is the Grand Hotel. And you have, again, a bit of a smoothing of the architecture here, whether there was a refacading or something going on. It feels like there's a blend going on here between the old and the new, but we still have a lot of the old iconography. The railings look new. You can see that they're not as rounded. So something has been diminished as we get to this point, I think, in the architecture. And a lot of people have done this research looking into the monarchies of the past, have suggested that the monarchies were a part of the old world. Our perception of monarchy in the modern day is an oppressive power structure that oppresses the people and allows the aristocratic class to live in opulence. And those who have done the research suggest that the monarchies were once a much more benevolent force, and that power structure was hijacked by the invaders, I suppose you could say. It's an interesting suggestion, I think. And I think all of it's really on the table. I put no faith or trust in the historical narratives. The ones that do will thumb their nose at this type of research and laugh at it, saying that why would you question history? Because we have it all laid out for us. Well, that history has been laid out for us by these nefarious forces, I would say, that are not working in the best interests of humanity. This is the Hermitage of the Virgin. I'm just showing some of the magnificent statue work going on here. Another look at those streets. Initially I thought this was water. This is interesting. Maybe it is. Maybe it was a wet day and this is water drying up as it goes on. But you can see the infrastructure. Magnificent looking light posts. Early automobiles. There's that bank. Now, that bank was said to have been built in the early 20s, I believe, or teens, late teens. And when would we say this was built, or this photo was taken? I would say not long after that, so none of this looking like it's new to my eye. Although I would suggest that the squaring off up here is likely new. This portion here, probably not a part of the original structure. Again, we have the wreathed iconography, the same lettering that we've seen, and modern day lettering down here. And we will be taking a look at this one. Beautiful structure. No shortage of these triangular domed structures in Madrid as well. We got always multi-storied, always heavily adorned with decoration. I got all sorts of statues, and yeah. I think history has been rewritten for us. Palace Hotel. There's a very short timeline, March 11th to September 1912, so a year and a half. We're being told that this was put together. How old is this photograph? We've got trees right next to the building. ticking all those boxes of a false historical timeline. This building looks to be much older than what we're being told. And there's just a quick look at one of the natural light areas inside the Palace Hotel. The Palace of Velázquez, this was built as a part of the Exposition. You saw the Crystal Palace earlier, you're seeing a lot of similarities. Supposedly built at that same time frame, and also showing us these griffin-type creatures in the statue work. So I think we're looking at part of that reset narrative, the kickoff and the celebration of a new reign, if you will. The Palace de Communication, I probably butchered that. This one again fitting that 1900s timeline, and you do see a bit of almost a parging going on with a lot of this. I think probably much older, but has been resurfaced, refacaded. Here's an early one in the narrative from the 1600s. It's built in 25 years. Parroquia de San Andres. And we still have this one standing, and you can see some of the age on that. Fountain out front, all the cobbled streets, and then just some of the interior, very, very, very high ceilings, very ridiculous. Why would you build like this? I suppose is my question. Where's the practicality? I know that this historical narrative will tell us that this is all an homage to that religious aspect. I think all of that psychology has been used and hijacked. If you take a look at the statue work here and the details, this is not painted on. You can see what's going on here. Very, very detailed, all the way up to the underside of the dome. In the 1600s, we're being told that this was put together. And here's the pipe organ. Pipe organs in this research suggesting a part of the old world sound frequency, all coming with that package. We have all sorts of theories on that, and we can theorize all we want, but one thing I'm fairly confident in is that it was not built for the purposes we have been told, and so all has been repurposed. Okay, we come to this structure, the Casa de Allende. Again, built in that timeline here, that Spanish flu timeline, I guess, if you will. The world is at war, but Spain is dealing with an epidemic, and they're building structures like this. And you can see here we've got a little bit of construction going on, so they decided to cover it and put a big ad of some sort on the front. But we do get a look at the upper area and feeling much older than what we're being told. And ticking all those boxes. So many of these balls on top of these points with spires suggests harnessing of an energy and then coming down through the system into the building. And another closer look. Having a very similar feel to that castle when we look at the side here with these bulging parts sticking out. Interesting style of architecture. Nice looking structure, supposedly built in the 19 teens. So this at the time of this photograph, I guess this is only a 10-year-old building, if you believe that. The Plaza Mayor. And if you do a quick Wikipedia search on the Plaza Mayor, you'll find that this thing goes through a series of fires down through the years. You can see here construction didn't begin until 1617. Suffered 3 fires in its history. You can read more of that if you'd like. I think all of that is a misdirection. Certainly a destination location if you're going to Madrid. Some sort of central meeting area. Now this is the Basilica of San Miguel. Multiple churches. Worth a mention. This is kind of what I was talking about. This is more like the iconography and painting that you would expect to see in these old world structures. Very detailed paintings on the ceilings in these places, and certainly not like the one we saw previously with that more almost computer imaged zigzags and all the rest of it. This is more fitting of what I would consider to be old world. You've got several arches actually in Madrid, multiple locations. Of course, if you've been to the area and you can add anything to the story, please do in the comment section below. I'm sure Madrid has an extensive underground system, like so many of these cities around the world do, that the narrative doesn't really account for. It's like they scrubbed over the history and they started from the top down and tried to rewrite what we could see, and they almost haven't even gotten to the lower reaches. Or if they find any sort of arches underground, they'll attribute that to the Romans from 2,000 years ago. And if you look at the Royal Basilica of St. Francis, they'll tell us that this was built the second half of the 18th century. And there's no specifics, of course, on years. That's what we get as the explanation. And we take a look at the interior, and it's jaw-droppingly spectacular. Remember, 1700s, we're being told that they were building this way. And my suggestion is that this is from a previous civilization, and we have been reset, and the stories have been retold. And down through the years, those stories become... What's the line from The Lord of the Rings? History became myth, myth became legend, and none now live who remember it. I think there's some truth to that. There's that familiar brickwork. Now, we saw this style of construction on a building from the 19-teens, but this building supposedly built in the late 1700s. The Royal Palace. Now, this photograph apparently from 1843. We're told that they began construction on this in 1735. A very early photograph here, and you can see how prominent the infrastructure is in the front here. You've got access points at very low locations, working its way all the way to the top. And the explanation for so many of these royal palaces is that they were just very wealthy and they had access to all sorts of slave labor to get these things done. I suggest an inheritor's narrative. Let's look at some of the interiors of the royal palace in Madrid. Reminding me a lot of many of the state capitals in the United States. Almost identical style with the columns, with the stone railings. And we have more detailed paintings, I suppose. If this were a state capital in the States, you would have some sort of depiction of a cowboy, probably, and the meeting with the Indians and all the rest of it. So stories have been rewritten, I suggest. This having a bit of a feel of the gilded mansions in the States as well. And we are told that the gilded mansions were an attempt to copy what they were seeing in these locations. My suggestion is that they're all coming from that same civilization, and these royal inheritors were preserving and stealing basically what was already there and claiming it as their own. Again, this is not a painting. You can see all of this is embossed, if you will, protruding from the curved ceiling. Anybody out there who does this type of work, can you fathom even attempting to work on a room like this? What about this? Even the depictions are showing these old world structures. Absolutely breathtaking. Old world. And there's a modern look at the Royal Palace and the Cathedral. This is the San Antonio de los Alamanes. I wanted to include it because of the interior. There's the interior there. Every square inch has been painted. And what are they actually depicting here? I suspect they had to rewrite many of the stories that were depicted in these structures. Although many of them have been erased and whitewashed and painted over, a lot haven't. And I think there's much more to the stories that they're showing us than what we've been told. And there's the, as we look up into the rounded area. That's what we're dealing with in this absolutely breathtaking San Antonio de los Alemanes. What do you think's going on here? Is this a removal of the old infrastructure, or will they tell us that this is a installation of brick roads? This does not look like the way that the bricks are all looking like rubble here. This does not look like this is an installation to me. This looks like this is a removal of what was once there. Let me know what you think in the comments. That Spanish flu story, very suspicious. I won't get into it in detail here. I did find this one interesting. This is supposedly from 1929. Look at the tower, and you've got these individuals at the top. Very interesting part of the infrastructure. Now the rail cars jut around the tower, suggesting the tower was there for much longer. I just thought it would be interesting to include that. More street scenes, and I can find street scenes like this for you all across the world. Massively wide streets, so wide that even in the modern day they're able to accommodate 3-4 lane roads on either side, and that central thoroughfare has been replaced by a meridian. Very interesting. They got rid of the rail cars, put in a meridian, and they still have the luxury of having 3 or 4 lane wide streets to accommodate cars in the modern day. All of this looking very old. And with that statue work going on here again, interesting looking power poles. This guy's got a ladder, he's doing some service work up here. Very, very wide open areas. And just going to show you more scenes. Some of these are doubled up. Let me know what you think about checking out some of these European cities. If you have one in mind that you'd like me to look at, let me know in the comment section below. I do have a Belgian city coming up. But happy to look, do a broader search, I think, now. Since I have extensively looked at many of the cities in the United States. The United States and Canada are interesting in this field of research because of the way the timeline has been shortened. That gives the whole cowboys and Indians and not much going on in so many of these locations. So it's easier to portray that the deception in the historical timeline, where a lot of these have that, again, monarchical and heavy Vatican influence in these European cities, or religious in general. Again, I think what's going on, they're taking out the infrastructure. You can see that the rail lines are all intact. I think seem to be removing a magnificent looking city. I'll just roll through some more of the visuals for you. There's a nice look at one of the streetcars, looking very old. How long has this been around for, this vehicle itself? More, is this construction or deconstruction? Have a bit of flooding going on here. There's your timeline on the flooding, 1919. That same timeline they're doing construction in other areas. Inconsistencies in the historical narrative. This is the Technical University. We'll end on this one. Okay, we won't end on that one. We'll end on this one. Thanks for watching. This has been an old world exploration. If you're new to the channel, don't forget to subscribe, hit the thumbs up button, and comment. I believe we are in the process of remembering who we really are and casting off the shackles of illusion. Until next time.